Hello and welcome to Government 101. I'm Eileen Preston. Today, my guest was only 26 years old when he became a representative in the Massachusetts State Legislature for 40,000 people. He did that job for 2 years and then decided to term limit himself and run for state senate. In November, he won by 51% of the vote, and in January, he was sworn in as our newly elected state senator. That's enough hints. If you haven't guessed yet, we're here with State Senator Dylan Fernandes.
So good to be with you.
Welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you. Lots of questions, so we'll get
sure.
rocking on it.
Sure.
So you've lost Dukes County and Nantucket. You're no longer representing those. Mm-hmm. But you've gained, I think, 4 times the amount of people you have to represent, 160,000, right?
Yeah. So I go from around 45,000 to a little over 160. And the towns, Falmouth is my hometown. I grew up here. I live here. But then I gained 7 other towns. So the whole Upper Cape. So Mashpee, Bourne, and Sandwich, and then over the bridge in Plymouth, Pembroke, Kingston, and Plimpton. So it's a pretty big district, north to south. A lot of people. A lot of the issues are pretty similar, actually. They're just kind of different degrees of severity among them. But it's interesting. I go from probably the only House member that goes from House to Senate, and it's actually easier for me to get around my district because I'm not, I'm not taking a 2-hour ferry to the Vineyard for a 30-minute meeting,
Yeah.
or Nantucket or the like. So it's not bad to have to drive instead.
Yeah. So, do you probably listen to a podcast or something when you drive, or how do you?
I listen to some music usually, or a podcast. Sometimes a podcast. Listen to a little hockey podcast, but usually music. And then actually, I spent a lot of time making phone calls in the car.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So
that's about listening. You started a listening tour. Mm-hmm. I think you're in the middle of it, or maybe you finished it. I saw your Falmouth tour.
Yeah, we just finished. So, being accessible and engaging with people that I represent, always really important to me. And so, this being a new district, a lot of people in Falmouth know me, but, for the other towns, especially, is really important to get out there. We had a listening session in all 8 towns, which was great. Biggest turnout though in Falmouth, per usual.
Okay.
This is,
nice to hear.
It's a very engaged. It's probably the most engaged community. Which it always has been, and I hope always will be. I think it's what makes Falmouth special. But, that's important to me, those kind of concerns and questions and kind of hopes that people have. We're going to take that to the State House, and that's going to inform our work. And I think that's what public service should be about.
So you probably heard a lot of the same themes in all the different towns. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you heard anything in particular that was new to you? You okay?
This is strong water. A lot of the issues are pretty similar. So it's a lot around housing, affordability issues, childcare, affordability. Really, a lot of this has been made around Massachusetts losing population, people leaving Massachusetts. Who are those people? They're generally people who look kind of like me. They're in their 30s to 40s, and they just state that the reason they're leaving is because they can't afford a place to live here, and they can't afford childcare for their kids. So, I think we really need to address that. We have some ideas there. Environmental concerns. These are coastal communities. Falmouth has an incredible amount of coastline, which is why we all love it here, but that makes us particularly vulnerable as well to sea level rise, to water quality issues. So people are concerned about about that and how that impacts our tourism industry. And then a whole host of issues, whether it's, healthcare or mental health related. The state's proposing closing the only inpatient mental health clinic that they run on the Cape and Islands, Pecasset, 16 beds. It's a great facility. We've been really vocal and kind of leading the charge against that. I think that's a really bad idea. I think we need more mental health services here on the Cape and here in our region. So, those are just kind of some of the issues, but it's a you never know what's going to come up, which makes it fun. There's a wide range of things people care about.
So, speaking of a wide range, you have introduced, since becoming senator, so we're here in February, 48 new acts on the docket, right?
Yeah.
So, and you have a pretty good track record as a representative of getting things into law. So, can we talk about some of them?
Of course.
You've got some housing bills I'd love to talk about. Two of those, I think. One is about a savings account.
Yeah. So we have a lot of bills, and we filed 48 in our first 2 weeks. That's always a scramble. You got to do it in the first 2 weeks, and then you can file bills after that, but they're technically not timely filed. But any bill that you file in the first 2 weeks automatically gets a public hearing, and so that's why there's kind of a scramble there.
That's interesting.
And so we filed a lot of bills. I mean, I hope the bills really get at the needs of the district, but housing is one of the biggest ones. And to get to that point, a lot of these people are leaving or would be first-time home buyers.
That's right.
A huge impediment to being a first-time home buyer is the amount you have to put down to avoid mortgage insurance. And so this is a first-time home buyer savings account that allows home buyers to save money tax-free and then use that to put down on a down payment for their home, avoid mortgage insurance, which is basically just a payout to a financial institution with no real kind of financial gain. And so this is what I hope will be kind of an on-ramp to home ownership. There's so much more to do around this issue, but this is kind of one piece of
You kind of
many.
nibble at all the areas,
For
right?
sure.
A lot of problems, not one big solution. Home sharing, what is that about?
Home sharing is around an incentive program to help with different types of kind of arrangements at home, like incentives for kind of people who might be a homeowner, who've had a home for a long time, who might have a really big home but have extra room. And so to be able to share that with people.
Old-fashioned boarding house.
Yeah, or just have multi-generations living together in a way that, this country used to have quite a bit, but has gotten away from. Basically a way to encourage more access to housing in our existing home stock, which I think is important too.
And I don't have to tell you, I think 50% of our workforce comes from over the bridge. And you've introduced something about the commuter rail trail, the commuter rail.
Yeah, two different issues, rail trail and commuter rail. But the commuter rail is...
that might help as far as housing as well, right? You might need a little less housing if people could take the trains over.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everything's interconnected for sure. And so for the first time, South Coast Rail is finally coming to New Bedford and Fall River.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be commuter rail from the South Coast up to Boston. We pushed for them to go through the Middleborough route on their way to Boston because Middleborough directly connects to Buzzards Bay on the other side of the bridge, but in Bourne. And so we wanted that because we could do a feeder train from Buzzards Bay to Middleborough that meets up with South Coast Rail so that you could have commuter rail access for people on kind of the north side of Bourne. And so that would open it up for people on the Cape and Islands to be able to access commuter rail. I think this could be a really kind of important piece for our region. You could take it yourself.
I
would love to take it.
Yeah.
I love trains.
I do
Trains
too. I think it's a fun way.
They're my favorite way to travel. So it would be nice. I would love it. And the Cape Cod Commission did a report on it. They recommended it. It takes cars off the roads. You could envision a system where the Cape Cod RTA meets up with it. So you take more road, you make more cars off the bridges and the like. So I think this is really helpful. One, to give the people living here more transportation options, but also to reduce the number of cars that the tourists are bringing here.
Yeah, and when we think about that canal area and the congestion there, I also think about Holtec, and I wonder if you could update people on that. They're hoping to evaporate the radioactive.
Yeah.
Sort of
Yeah.
terribly scary. But
Yeah.
it sounds scary.
It does.
You have some acts for that, right?
Yeah.
You have two things you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do. We have a number of pieces on this. I think, for people who don't know, Holtec, which took over the decommissioning of Nuclear Pilgrim Power Plant,
Thank you.
for a long time was dumping the treated nuclear wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. And so, along with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, which did a great job of leading the way on this, there was a lawsuit or an act called the Ocean Sanctuaries Act was identified to the DEP to say actually Massachusetts preempts authority when it comes to our oceans. And so through that act, the DEP ruled that Holtec could no longer dump their treated nuclear wastewater into Cape Cod Bay. So that's been stopped, which is a good thing. However, they've been now evaporating it, and the water they're evaporating is actually untreated. And so we filed legislation to say that they have to completely halt evaporation until we can study the health impacts of it, because we don't know, we don't have monitoring. It could be perfectly safe. Okay. We don't know, but or it could be harmful. So because we don't know,
it could kill you, but it could be
well,
fine.
we don't, and that's why
Yeah.
that's why we're saying it should be halted until monitoring is in place to determine the health impacts of it. And I think that's the right thing to do, and that's what we're going to be pushing.
Okay, so that's really interesting. Okay, I really want to talk about 4-day work week.
Sure. Yeah,
I have no personal interest in this.
yeah, I know. This is everyone loves this bill. So this is a bill to go to a 4-day work week. It's pretty simple.
Right.
Americans haven't had a reduction in working hours since the 1940s.
Sorry, it's not really a reduction though, right? It would be like a study for 10 hours a day for 4 days,
No.
Is that right? No, it actually would be 8-hour day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a pilot program that businesses can opt into. It's no sort of state mandate around this.
Okay.
And then those businesses that opt into it would be studied for a number of metrics around productivity, around worker happiness, around worker retention, and around kind of the regular business metrics for that business. We filed it because the data here is actually quite compelling. There's a ton of places around the world that have done this and have shown that not only do employees really enjoy it, as you can imagine, but it increases employee retention. It increases the ability to attract employees, which are two big issues impacting businesses. And then also, not only is there no impact on productivity of the company, but in some instances, there's a boost in productivity. So moving to a 4-day work week for the vast majority, if not all companies that have done it and been studied doing it, have shown only positive results across the board. And so I think it's at least worthwhile to do a pilot program here in Massachusetts to determine whether kind of our main industries here also fit that mold. A lot of countries are moving this way. Yeah, Japan, actually their government moved to a 4-day work week. A lot of different places around the globe. And there's there's some towns in Massachusetts that have I think Swampscott moved to one, and have seen some positive results as well.
So the town of Swampscott, their
yeah,
workers.
It's a North Shore town. I'm pretty sure it's Swampscott, but one of the North Shore towns is a 4-day work week now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the Trump administration is in.
Yeah.
And you're familiar with that because I think you guys both had the same day he was president, you became a state representative, right?
That's right.
So you've seen this program before. And now there's a couple of things sort of threatened, right,
Mm-hmm.
that I can think of just off the top of my head. The bridges, the Upper Coonamessett, here in Falmouth, the restoration project, the funding has been frozen. The bridges, and I did have another one that I thought was sort of on threat there, offshore wind.
Mm-hmm.
So What are your thoughts about these things? Is there any that you think, well, that's just going to have to wait for 4 years, or is there something you think?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? So I think the way to, and there's a lot, I find a lot of it deeply concerning and undemocratic, and that we have, the richest man in the world going around gutting working people.
And giving Nazi salutes.
And giving Nazi salutes, and just doing, what people need to understand is that I don't disagree. I think there are places where the government can be more efficient.
Yeah.
And I think that that's worth exploring. I think that just going around and slashing and burning is one of the stupidest ways one could design a policy solution around that. And it's already causing a lot of pain. It's going to cause people even more pain. And I worry that it's going to do irreparable harm to our government and to us, to the people living under it. So, we'll kind of see. But I think when thinking about the Trump administration, we did a lot to insulate Massachusetts, 4 years ago. So now we have, women have access to abortion here that's enshrined in Massachusetts law. We have protections in place against other states trying to prosecute people who come to Massachusetts for that type of care. One of my first bills that I passed was signing Massachusetts onto the Paris Climate Agreement when the Trump administration pulled out of it. But when responding to the administration, I think there are really high probability events that are worth paying attention to. And then there are a bunch of other things that, like, who knows what they're going to do. So offshore wind is, essentially dead for 4 years.
Okay.
A big, component of Massachusetts hitting its climate goals are around offshore wind. So the state's going to have to respond to that. We get a lot of energy from Hydro-Quebec, actually, in Canada, but then he's putting tariffs on that. So is that going to further drive up people's energy prices? We'll kind of see what's real and what's actually not real with those threats. And then other things like it's going to be really, I think, a big challenge to get funding for the Bourne Bridge. We already have funding for the Sagamore. Can they claw back funding for the Sagamore? That is an open question. I think it's an unlikely probability, but we'll see. And then there's a lot of other projects. There's tons of things. The Woods Hole institutions, MBL, Hui, they get a lot of funding from the government for science. I think a lot of that's probably going to be deeply impacted, and that's going to hurt our community. You're hearing about pausing of other community projects that have federal funds. Obviously, that's going to have a big impact. But the things that the state can't control for is around the funding piece. And so, these are pieces that are going to hurt our economy. And these are some really good projects for us. And then if they go after something like Medicare or Medicaid, that's billions of dollars, and so that would be a huge amount of money to make up that the state frankly doesn't have. So that would, I think there's going to be a decent amount of chaos in terms of trying to in terms of losing funding. But if they go after really big things, that's it's going to be really hard, if not impossible, for the state to fill multi-billion-dollar gaps in healthcare funding. So I think that would be wildly unpopular, and my hope is that they don't go after that. But as they've seen in the first few weeks, I don't think anything's kind of off the table. Yeah,
it's the third rail of politics, right? Medicare, Medicaid, right? Isn't it, or is that Social Security?
Well, they tried to take it away last time he was president, and then John McCain was the deciding vote again. They were one vote away from gutting it. So so we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that's a federal issue that we don't have a lot of power with is immigration. Mm-hmm. Gosh knows you had to deal with that issue in Martha's Vineyard pretty close up and quickly scale up and learn on the job how to handle that situation. Now they're thinking about that again. And I know our select board is about to have a meeting on Saturday talking about how to handle it if there's ICE detentions that come along, with the police making decisions, the sheriff, the school superintendents. Is Massachusetts, are we just at the whim of what they decide, the feds? What are you thinking?
Yeah, we are. I mean, there's not a whole lot, immigration's a federal issue.
Right.
And so the feds, it's almost entirely in their purview. And so I think part of the issue is whether you use state resources to help enforce a federal issue, which is immigration. My understanding is that the sheriff here and the chief of police here have said, no, that doesn't make sense. That's not our purview. But if the feds want to, come and do, ICE raids, there's nothing that the state has the power to do. There are things like the Lund decision made by the Supreme Judicial Court, which basically says that the state can't detain people just purely around their immigration status, and so there's some clarity around that. But ultimately, immigration is and always has been a federal issue in Massachusetts. Like we don't have borders, we don't have, well, we do have borders, but it's with Rhode Island and New Hampshire and the like. So there's little we can do around controlling it as well. Yeah. And so from a state perspective, we have to react and respond and try to govern with the things we can control. And I think we've been doing our best on that. We've had a lot of issues with the shelter program and kind of the amount of funding that's taken up there. But we've made some really big reforms there actually in the past couple of weeks. It was
contracted, right? Less time can you shelter and
significantly, yeah. And there's now kind of more. There's now a residency requirement, so the focus is on people who've been here and plan to stay here, and also less time, background checks, a cap on the number of families. I mean, really tough decisions, some of the hardest decisions we've had to make, and I want everyone to be able to have access to shelter. That's really important to me. But at the end of the day, like we only have so much money too, and so when you have only so much money, you have to make decisions. So we've moved to prioritizing people that have been here longer and are planning to stay here.
Housing seems like 50% of the problems, right? I
yeah.
don't know.
Well, housing's a big part of it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Really, really massive.
Yeah.
So if we could just switch a little bit, what's your typical work week like?
I mean, every day is different. Every day is different. So it's a lot of, I drive a lot.
How often do you go up to Boston?
I'm there like it depends on the week, but usually there 2 to 3 days a week.
Okay.
So, so there quite a bit or a decent amount. So it depends. I mean, if we're in session, then that means we're voting on a bill, which means, we're spending a day kind of debating. There's hearings, so you have to go, I'm going to chair a committee. We'll find out probably this week which one, but we'll be chairing committees, having committee hearings. So that'll be, a big use of time. And then early on, I've made sure that we've not only done all these listening tours, but that we've gone and met with every town administration in the district, and we're starting to meet with lots of nonprofits in the areas. And so we're just getting out there in the community, hearing from towns about how we can partner with and support them, and then hearing from local organizations that do incredible work, like the Boys and Girls Club or the food pantries, or mental health services and the like, about how we can support them, be an ally to them, and really help kind of all organizations in our community to make it a vibrant place to live.
What do you read?
For news or generally?
Both, actually. Yeah. But I am wondering how you keep up to date, because there's a lot coming at all of us. Huh?
Yeah, well, for the state, the best resource is State House News Service. So
someone else told me that,
read that too. It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. They do a fabulous job. I mean, it's a highlight of journalism. I read the Falmouth Enterprise. I was reading the Falmouth Enterprise this morning. I like it. I like the Enterprise papers. I think we're really fortunate to have good local
television,
news, which is not a lot of places have that. And actually places north in this district, some places don't have news at all, which is crazy to me.
In your district?
Yeah, in our district. There's towns that don't have news. So they get news on Facebook, which is not news. It's just a terrible, it's a terrible place for news. And so really love the enterprise papers. The Plymouth Independent does a good job actually in terms of providing news in a town that had none for a while. They're kind of like the New Bedford Light, like they're an online nonprofit model. I think that's where you're going to see more places move to. I hope someone does that on Cape Cod, because the Cape Cod Times is kind of a shell of itself. You know, all these Gannett-run newspapers by private equity, I think, have really
done us a disservice.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's a few reporters there. I like the reporters do a good job, but the paper itself is just a shell of what it used to be. And then, you know, the Globe, I read the Globe every now and then. It's not, I liked it, and then I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I prefer those to the Globe, to be honest with you. But yeah, the local, I start with the locals.
Favorite part of the job?
Favorite part of the job is, I just love the ability to make an impact. I mean, that's why I do this. You know, that's why I ran. We did, you know, I've passed 35 bills into law in 8 years.
Yeah.
You know, those have, I think a lot of those have been really beneficial.
5 of them were state. They affected the whole state.
Oh, more than that.
Yeah. Oh, more than that.
Yeah, I think like 7 or 8 were statewide. And then a whole host of amendments also. And then been able to bring a lot of money back to our communities too.
Millions,
so being able to make an impact is something I'm really passionate about, care a lot about, and that's what I think. That's why I do it. I mean, the title is irrelevant to me. I got involved in public service because I wanted to make an impact, improve people's lives. I think that's what government needs to be focused on, and I think the more we're able to do that, the more we'll be able to show to people that, you know, government matters and can have
Public services.
Yeah, I think it has to be in a democratic society. It has to be.
Yeah. So cynicism.
That's what I care a lot
we
about.
have to fight cynicism, eh?
Yeah, and I think you fight it by being really competent and working really hard and showing people that you're showing up for them and caring about them and working on things that are going to better their lives. I think that's how we combat this kind of cynicism around government, this distrust around government, is showing up and doing the work.
One more question, because you've been very generous with your time. I want to know if there was a certain day when you thought, wow, I really did a good thing here. This was fabulous. Was there anything that you thought, wow?
Yeah, that's a good question. When we passed some of the big clean energy legislation that I'd worked on, that felt really good, and it was particularly around workers and making sure that for the new, for big energy projects, that it's going to be done with union jobs. And so not only are we transitioning to kind of a clean, green economy, which of course is good for our environment and the like, but we're also doing it in a way that brings a lot of kind of working people along with it and builds them kind of an on-road into the middle class. And that to me was particularly meaningful. And then there's really, little things too that I love, like helping people get on to, health insurance, or helping people collect unemployment who really need it. There are little things like that that have a really massive impact in people's lives, and that can be rewarding because you see, even though it's like a small thing on our end, you see how that, and you see how it might be a small kind of, not a ton of work on our end to fix, but that fix does incredible things for that person's life.
Such impact.
Really, totally. And that, I think is, that feels good.
Yeah. Okay, well, how do people get in touch with you if they want to tell you what they think?
Yeah, well, reach on out.
Or ask for
and
help.
don't be shy, please. I mean, we really care about people reaching out. So it's just, my email is just Dylan, like Bob Dylan, period, Fernandes with an S, at masenate.gov. Please reach out to us. And then my cell is 508-257-1174. So people can shoot me a text or give me a call.
Dylan Fernandes, thank you so much.
Pleasure,
This has
Eileen.
been wonderful. 48 bills already introduced, right?
Yeah, we got to pass them all.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you'll come back.
Of course.
We would love to do
Of
this
course.
again
I
and
would
find out
too.
how it's going.
I would too.
And thank you for watching Government 101. We'll be back next time.